It's bad enough to talk about what is happening within our borders. It is bad enough to realize that within the banking system, $126 billion were pulled out of the regional banks this last week, and close to $250 billion since the beginning of the banking crisis. And the ramifications of Janet Yellen saying that she will not backstop the regional banks unless the FOMC, the FDIC, herself, and the president agree that these banks that need to be bailed out are systemic enough to justify it. In essence, she's lit a fuse underneath the banks. It's bad enough what's happening there, which has created chaos in our industry, where it's one thing to talk about the stock and the bond market being fragile, the real estate market showing signs of fragility. It's another thing to think that the bank that you've trusted your life savings to for your whole life, or your business, or your retirement accounts, or whatever it may be, if you're a farmer, even the loans that you have to buy your combine and your diesel fuel to plant your fields and all the working capital, you're wondering, what am I going to do? That's bad enough. That is exacerbating the trends that we are now seeing. And I counted close to 20 things that happened just this last week. So let's just run through several of them real quick. One, you have Saudi Arabia entered a trade alliance with China, Russia, India, and Pakistan in an attempt to step further away from the reliance on the dollar. This is all in the last week, okay? This is since we've last talked. You have China and France completing the first liquid natural gas trade using Chinese yuan, of course, ending the reliance on the US dollar for energy trades. You have China and Brazil, who is the second largest exporter of corn in the world, is now settling trades in their own currencies, ditching the dollar. You have a representative of the Russian State Duma that says what we already knew, that Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa are developing a new currency, and that these currencies will have these new reserve currency pegged to commodities. You have Saudi Arabia partnering with China to build a Chinese oil refinery for 83.7 billion yuan, or $12.2 billion. We talked about last week Kenya signing a deal with Saudi Arabia and the UAE to buy oil with Kenyan shillings instead of US dollars, and the president of Kenya telling its citizens to get rid of US dollars or go see the nurse, because within 2 weeks, something will happen. And you have the Association of the Southeast Asian Nations considering dropping US dollar, euro, yen, and British pounds for local currency and financial settlements. And the top of the agenda is reducing dependence on the US dollar, the euro, the yen, and the pound from financial transactions. You have India agreeing to settle trade in Indian rupees with certain countries instead of US dollars, and those are countries that are having currency failure or dollar shortages. So they're coming in and saying, we'll trade with you even if you can't get dollars or you're having problems with your own local currency. You have the Chinese yuan surpasses the euro to become Brazil's second largest currency in foreign currency reserves. Another huge deal. You have the US Social Security funds, according to Reuters, this last week said that they're due to run out by 2033. Now, we've talked a lot about the $76 trillion shortfall in Social Security. You had our president come out and said that the banking crisis is not over yet. You had Saudi Arabia agree to join the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as a dialogue partner. That's the first step, is becoming a full member. It's a big deal, because the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which represents close to 60% of the Eurasian landmass and pretty darn close to that same percentage of population of the world, which is a military organization as well. So, you know, if you're going to break free from the dollar and the petrol reserve standard, and certainly having your ducks in a row in terms of protection, we've talked at length about how they've signed the protection agreement with Russia, and now they joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. You're talking about being protected from the West and the ramifications of leaving the petrodollar. We learned again about the BRICS currency, that it would be backed by gold and commodities such as rare earth metals. This was a new interview given by a Russian finance guy with the last name of Babakov, and he said, left open the possibility of a unified currency arising within the BRICS, potentially backed by gold as well as other commodities such as rare earth elements or land. And then you have, from the stupidity department, NATO fully to adopt Finland, further antagonizing Russia. And from the can't confirm this. This was issued by a Russian state TV war correspondent, has claimed that North Korea is preparing to send 500,000. It's weird because one says 500,000 and the other says 50,000. So let's go with 50,000 troops to the Ukraine to fight alongside Russian troops. And again, we talked about $126 billion pulled out of the banks in this last week. So when you talk about the things that we've been talking about, you can see they are accelerating greatly. And when you talk about, Saudi Arabia moving away from the dollar and now aligning themselves with all of these countries and formally applying for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, this is a very big deal. It's getting closer and closer to that moment that Mike Adams calls Operation Sandman, where the countries just say we're done with the dollar because it is no longer the reserve currency, the petrol reserve, and the ramifications of what that means. And that's what everyone is missing. And that's the one thing that I keep harping on. When this happens, you better have your ducks in a row. You better have your house in order, because it's too late if you don't. Because when this happens, you will see a flood, a tsunami of inflation hitting our shores as the world where there's 2 or 3 or 4 times the amount of dollars outside the country than there is here inside it. You'll see inflation at a level that no one can imagine, and the byproduct of that is spiked interest rates, which blows everything up. And this, to me, is exactly why you are seeing such massive drawdown in supply from the world's exchanges, because the people who have the most money are also closest to the information. And accelerating these trends would be the rumors that are now somewhat substantiated in that Mexico has formally applied to the BRICS. And the rumor that hasn't been substantiated yet is Japan, Australia, and New Zealand entertaining joining the BRICS. The walls are closing in around us, Dunnigan, and I think you asked for what had happened. I don't think you expected this much of an explanation, but this is in 1 week what has happened. And when you talk about an acceleration of events, this is exactly what this is. And to me, it only is exacerbated by the idiocy and the stupidity of our monetary and fiscal policy here at home, and doing things that make us the laughing stock of the world, like meddling with the election and arresting former President Trump on things that are 1,000 times less meaningful than what the own administration's family has been involved in. And I think the world sees this, that we are becoming a country that certainly is not what we once were or what we stood for. And I think it's time for people to wake the heck up and stop looking at gold and silver to make money and look at it for what it is. It is a life raft in a boat that's about ready to go over the falls. And I think it's time for people to understand that.